Hello and welcome to the Publicly Challenged Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Oswald, and I hope you join me on my quest for knowledge to become a better public land hunter, angler, and forager. Stick with this and who knows, maybe we will learn something together. All right, folks, we are back with another episode of Publicly Challenged. I am here with Clay Bowers and Patrick Durkin. Patrick, would you go ahead and introduce yourself for everybody listening?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, Pat Durkin is my name, of course. You just said that. I live in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. I've been a reporter and outdoor writer since about I think my first article published was 1982. Probably like March of 82. I was in college then, but then I started working for the local newspaper too about the same time while I was still in college. So my first 8 years I spent working as a outdoor writer and editor, and basically I was a jack of all trades for the newspaper in Oshkosh called the Oshkosh Northwestern. Along the way, I was often interviewing a guy up in Appleton, Wisconsin named Al Hofacker. And Al was one of the original founders of Deer and Deer Hunting magazine. And Deer and Deer Hunting hired me in 1990, right at the end of 1990, to be their editor, and I did that for 11 years. And after working at Deer and Deer Hunting for 11 years, I spent the last 22 years now freelancing full time. And so my freelance work, all my years now, I started writing my outdoor column back in 1984 for the Oshkosh paper, and all during my years at Deer and Deer Hunting magazine, and all through the present time, I've written that weekly outdoor column every week for almost 40 years now without ever missing a week.
Oh, so no kidding.
I'm real proud of that, because it takes commitment to write every week, no matter what. And so I've done that, and but for many years, I also did a lot of editing for people. I was a copy editor for the Archery Trade Association for, oh gosh, almost 20 years, helping them out on, I'd work with their writers, and quite often the ATA would have new writers out of college, and it was kind of my job to give them some on-the-job training and school them on how to do basic writing, good news writing, basically. But in the last 5-6 years, I've been one of the primary contributors for Meat Eater too on their website. So I've had a fun career. I've always been working with interesting publications and interesting people, and the outdoors beat is just I look at my job as covering the outdoors as a news beat. And one of my jobs as writing the newspaper column is to provide commentary on basically mostly Wisconsin issues, Wisconsin political issues that involve the outdoors. And the one thing I always tell people is when they get mad about something I write, they'll say, they don't want to know about the politics. And I always tell them, well, in the United States, it's our form of government. That this is what we do. We're in a free society, and people argue. We debate our topics openly, and this is instead of trying to squash me or you just argue with me, right back. And this is the process we're engaged in. And I just don't think it's possible for people who live in the United States to not have politics in their daily lives, because it's our system of government, and I just think it's kind of a fun thing about living in this country is that we get to express our views and hash things out, and you hope you do it with enough mutual respect where we make progress, over time. So that's basically my job. Is like I say, it's as a freelancer that the biggest difference between that and a regular job is you have to be willing to work 7 days a week. And the joke among most freelancers is that it's your hours are flexible. You get to choose which 12 to 14 hours a day you want to work every day. Because if you ever try to coast as a freelancer, you probably won't make enough money to get by. You have to really work at it.
Yeah.
Wow. I have a question for you
Sure.
based on what you just said. Um, so I also am like a very big fan of the inquisitive nature and arguing about things or debating rather. But it seems like the world that we live in, I know this isn't hunting related,
Uh-huh.
but does the world feel to you like it does? I'm 40 right now.
Uh-huh.
It feels to me like when I was younger, you could actually just like hang out with people who might not share your same political view and you could still be friends. But nowadays it
Yeah.
seems like that is completely gone.
Yeah. I don't know if it's completely gone, but it's I have to say it really saddens me when I see how belligerent people get, and they want you to agree with them or else they want to crush you. That comes
Mhm.
across a lot, where they either you're in 100% or you're not at all. And
Mhm.
I just don't I hope that's a temporary thing because it's just not a realistic way. It's not sustainable for people to live that way.
Yeah.
That's just not something that's part of the American history. I liked one of my lifelong lessons. I remember getting this when I was like 13 years old. I hope it's not too long of a story, but a little story that kind of gives my perspective is that my family had a German Shepherd when we were kids, and the dog got accused of biting a neighbor kid and ended up in a lawsuit where for like 2 days our family sat in a courtroom and listened to these arguments back and forth about did this dog bite this neighbor kid or not, and various people came in and testified. I even had to give a little testimony because I remember I was with the dog that night during the time of supposedly biting this kid. But anyway, as the 2 days were wrapping up, my dad took us out for lunch, and he said, "Now, when you go back in this afternoon, then the lawyers will make their concluding remarks, their closing comments." He said, "Just watch them now, and you'll think they don't like each other. You'll think they hate each other by the things they say in these closing remarks." But he said that the thing that you should know is that when this is all over with, those two guys will be sitting in this bar right now that we're sitting at, and they'll be having a drink, and because that's how professionals act. They give it their best shot, they argue their best, make their best arguments, and then they shake hands and go home and go about their business. And I always thought that was a good way of looking at how we should operate as a society, that we make our arguments, but we come together at some point and compromise, and that's just a good realistic way of going about life. I think that you can't always win, and I just think that's how we should be doing things. So I still try to give, when I write, I still try to give my honest thoughts on stuff, but with the idea that I want to back it up with as much factual information as I can pull together for that short space. Because it's not like you can write a book every week. You only have a certain amount of words you're allowed to crank out there in newspapers. Because I grew up in newspapers. My career's been in newspapers, and newspapers, unlike today with the internet, there's a finite space to fill, and it was always called the news hole, and you had to
Mhm.
fill that hole. But then anything overflowed from that hole just got left out. It didn't get in. So that was a good way to learn about writing tightly too. But anyway, that to answer your question, I don't like the way it's gone. I don't like the way people are so my way or the highway these days, and
Mhm.
because I just don't think that's how our country got to where it is, and it's not sustainable. To only have one point of view and think that's going to carry us through the rest of our existence here.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Like one of the things that happened before Clay came on, but I posted a picture of one of my deer, and I really appreciated it. It was artistic. There wasn't any blood. There wasn't anything, but it was just the way the deer laid, the way the deer landed and fell on the ground, and how I came walking up. The light was coming in perfect. The shot was
Hmm.
just framed perfect. So I, in my head, was like, I need to capture this. I did. I filmed it, put it on social media, and it was like one of my most liked posts I've ever had. So of course, with that came a lot of hate, as well, and negative comments. And it didn't even bother me. It bothered my wife more than it bothered me as she was looking at it. And she's like, how are these people talking to you like this? How is that even okay that in society we can tell people we want to kill them, burn their house down? How about I shoot you with an arrow, all these different things? And I said, none of that matters because they don't have any perspective. Anybody can sit behind a keyboard and argue with somebody, but if they want to have an actual conversation, let's sit down and talk about it in a civil manner. And as soon as I said that, a light bulb went off in my head. And I messaged the lady. And I said, in front of everybody that commented on everything, if you'd like to discuss this further in a civil manner, I host a podcast. I would love to have you on and get your perspective, and we can discuss things like adults. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, it was just crickets. And that's not what I wanted. I actually wanted her to come on, generate one, content, and two, have a conversation.
Yeah, and I'm guessing the way you went about it probably is that you were polite about it, you were friendly about it. I've had people on podcasts in different parts of the country who didn't like something I wrote, and their invitations to appear on their podcast were so hostile. I thought, what do I have to gain by going on a podcast with someone who's just going to go out of their way to humiliate me? Because you can just tell that it wasn't. They weren't going into it with the spirit of let's have a honest debate here. It's more like, let me get you on my podcast so I can beat the crap out of you. Right. That's kind of how it came across. And so to me though, if a guy were to invite me on and say, we don't agree with you on this, but I'd like to hear your perspective and talk about it and do it in a friendly way, then I'm more than open to appearing and talking. But unfortunately, you just tell it was more like this guy was already crossways with me. He had you just picture his fists were up and ready to come after me. And I thought, I can't, how can that be constructive for anyone?
Yeah, that's kind of like the conversation that Clay and I were actually having, which is a huge hot button issue that you were listening in on before we started the podcast.
About crossbows?
Yeah, about crossbows and hunting and allocation of tags along with that. That is a huge issue for a lot of people, and they get so heated on it. And I mean, there is data on both sides of the aisle there.
Sure.
But I mean, let's come together and agree upon something, not just fight and say shouldn't exist. And, anybody that's not disabled shouldn't be able to shoot one. Nobody knows what stage of life somebody else is in or, where they're at. Like for me, you probably heard me say, I think they're a great gateway drug, but
the thing I can assure you is that people have been fighting about crossbows since long before you guys were around and probably long before I was around. But, back when I remember, the crossbow usage in this country really wasn't there's only like 2 or 3 states for many years that allowed crossbows. It was Ohio, Arkansas, and Wyoming were the 3 states for the longest time, the only ones to allow crossbows for deer hunting, and then in Wyoming allowed them for elk hunting. And then starting around 2003, 2004, the gates started opening up, and I like to say that, the question I often ask the crossbow critics is, how does this really affect you? How is this hurting you? And because I still like shooting a compound bow. I have a couple crossbows and I kill deer with them, but when it comes down to shooting in the backyard and going out west and hunting elk, the compound bow is still, God, it's a fun thing to hunt with.
Right.
Yeah. But I can honestly say though, I don't think I shoot that crossbow any more accurately offhand than I do my compound bow. If I can get a rest, I can shoot that crossbow pretty accurately compared to a compound. But shooting it offhand in the typical hunting situations that we find ourselves in, the compound bow, I think the way you can set those things up, get them to full draw, lock in, and bear down, they're deadly. I remember the first time I shot one I can almost feel it. It was like 1970, summer of 1974 was the first time I had a compound bow. It was one of these old Allen compound bows. And I was just amazed after shooting a recurve for a number of years. All of a sudden, you get this, and that Allen compound bow, you laugh at it, but we thought it was revolutionary for the draw weight to drop from 50 pounds to 40 pounds, that you're holding 40 pounds and drawing 50. And we thought that was just magical stuff.
Well, that is compared to like an Oneida or one of the, I don't remember what the other ones were called, but the ones that had like the recurve limbs on the first compounds, those were full draw weight the whole time, and then you had guys like the Wenzels that were out in Pennsylvania and shooting tires rolling down the hill with a balloon taped in them and using those things, and just amazing feats of archery. And then you've got guys like us just sitting in a tree stand trying to do it and pull back.
Different skill set.
Not me. I don't. I use the old crossbow.
Have you ever tried a compound though?
I own like some 1980s crossbow that I bought at a at like a garage sale for like $1. And I think it's like a 50-pound crossbow, or sorry, compound bow. And I'm no good with it. It doesn't have any sights on it. It doesn't have anything. It's all like when I shoot with it, it's all like intuitive shooting, like you would with like a recurve.
Which honestly is probably okay within 20 yards. But if you try and stretch out any more than that, trying to figure out the trajectory of that arrow and everything else, pretty hard to do. Yeah. Plus anchor point, all that changes. So then you've got more variations if you weren't, if you had like a recurve or something, as long as your anchor point's the same and, you got the right string twist on so your bow's actually technically tuned, you would be way better off with a recurve intuitively shooting than you would with, compound equipment, because it's not designed for that. Yeah. So many variables. We'll get you set up, Clay. You'll start shooting because what I find funny is I shot, I think it was a Pearson or, oh gosh, I can't think. I think it was like a Pearson compound bow that was like a late 1980s, early 90s compound bow. I got it, sometime late 90s and started shooting it. And in my mind, I still think I shot that better, even though it didn't have, the adjustable sight. It was, the little tiny pins with the little plastic dot or little paint on the tip of it and the brass pins. Yeah. I used to shoot that thing. And I remember going to the archery range and up to 30, 40 yards, headshots, shooting all the 3D targets in the eye, putting the arrow, and just amazing shot with it. Wow. I think the difference is, and expensive compound equipment, shooting my Matthews now versus that, whatever. The only thing that's changed is I used to shoot that bow 10 times as much as I shoot my bow now.
That's my biggest thing, as I talked about on the last podcast that we recorded, is just the lack of practice that I get with the bow. And I do feel like, as you were saying a minute ago, a rest for your crossbow. I always carry around a shooting stick, whether I'm shooting with a rifle or a crossbow. I like to put it on a shooting stick.
Yeah.
I even when I go squirrel hunting, I almost never shoot freehand. I'll push my gun up against this tree or something like that. I think I prefer a little bit more of a steady shot. I don't know if I got like shaky hands or something, but it's just like I shoot a lot better when I got something to.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I do have a question though in regards to you're pushing buttons and your facts that you were talking about. I was just listening to another podcast. They were talking all about you. They were talking about wolves. What do you got to say about wolves?
Well, where can we start? I guess my bottom line on wolves and all the predators is I get a lot of people. It's a real touchy subject, and one of my little comments I've made over the years. One observation I've had after many years of outdoor writing is that first comment I make is deer make people stupid. We can have wonderful discussions about managing waterfowl, walleyes, raccoons, beavers, you name it. We can have just real level-headed conversations. Then we get discussing deer, and all of a sudden, all rationality seems to kind of just instantly get vaporized when we start arguing and getting mad. So that's my first thought: is deer make people stupid. The second thing I've found for most of my life, most of my career, is that turkeys. Nobody seems to get too mad about turkeys. So I say turkeys make people happy. In Wisconsin, it seems like anytime there's any turkey news, people are happy. They just don't complain about how many turkeys we have, at least not in Wisconsin. Elsewhere, I know it's an issue, but Wisconsin tends to be people are overall happy about turkeys. But then wolves make people mad, and they and it seems like the wolf huggers are always mad at anyone who wants to even think about hunting wolves or trapping wolves. And then there's people in the hunting community who just want to get rid of them. And my position is always that wolves were here long before we were. We basically came through a period of time there in the 1900s where we got rid of them. But they were here before we were, and they came back on their own. There's people like to think that they want. I said the DNR brought the wolves back, but the DNR basically all it did was got laws passed where it's illegal to kill them. And then the wolves eventually just started trickling back in from northeastern Minnesota, and northeastern Minnesota never was out of wolves. They always had wolves up there. And as they started recolonizing Wisconsin, they eventually got to the point where they moved up into the UP of Michigan and repopulated the UP. But they really have not pushed very far into central and southern Wisconsin. We have a few in southern Wisconsin wandering through typically, and a few living in central Wisconsin, but they seem to be settling into areas that they can where they can survive. And that's causing problems, of course. When you have people and you have livestock and you have pets, wolves kill some of them. And when you have bear hunters with hounds, sending hounds out in the woods, wolves kill some of those dogs too. And it's I always think, well, for my dog, I'd be mad too. But I think this is one of the tough things about I think living in a democracy and living with among other people who have different ways that they want to use our resources, whether it's the forests, the bears that we're hunting with hounds, whatever it might be. I always talk about how we're very good at we have in our states like Wisconsin and Minnesota and Michigan, we have lots of public land compared to most people. But then all we do is fight about who gets to use it and how. And so it's we're forever fighting about who should be the alpha male or whatever it might be in all these public lands. So when I see people getting mad about wolves, I think, we might as well just get used to the idea that they're going to be here as long as we are now. We are not, that the rest of society, even if we could get rid of wolves again, wouldn't tolerate it now. So I think that's just the reality of the modern world that we're living in. And to think we're going to somehow ever get wolves driven out of here again, it's not going to happen. So I'm a big proponent of wildlife management, and the wolves I think should be managed too. And but then we get down to arguing about, well, how many wolves? And if we can ever find consensus on that, I guess I'll be surprised. But I don't think the way to do it is just to be so antagonistic that we don't talk to each other. And I think sometimes we've done things in Wisconsin that I think if your real interest is a long-term solution, you're not going to get a long-term solution when you're always in court fighting about this stuff. And so we have to get the wolf off the endangered species list, get it back in the state management, and then I think then we can have some, I think, intelligent discussions about how many and where and all those kind of discussions. But I for people who follow the Wisconsin issues, I believe in I support the current management plan. I hope we get back to where we can start having wolf seasons again. And like I was one of those lucky guys who drew a wolf tag back in 2012 when we had our first season. And I learned over the course of the next month or so, I wasn't open very long. I think that first season only lasted about 5-6 weeks, and you had to kind of bounce around looking for areas where there's still a quota open. And the thing I learned is that I'm not a very good predator hunter. I've always been a deer hunter, and I had a lot to learn about trying to call wolves. So I probably sound like an idiot out there, doing my imitations of wolves. But at the same time, though, the fun thing about it is I got to meet some new people, and I got to hang around with a couple of real serious trappers, and these guys were people who have inadvertently trapped wolves while trapping, trapping coyotes, and get a wolf instead, and then you have to, find a way to release it. And so, but it was just for me a real good educational opportunity. That's how I looked at it, was I'm going to go out there and try my best to get a wolf with my tag. But in the process, I think I'll learn something. And now it's been 11 years since that opportunity, and who knows when we'll get another chance to hunt wolves. But I don't know if I answered if that was what you're looking for, but it's an interesting thing, because I wrote about I wrote a column just recently, about a month ago, looking at the perceptions people have. And one of the comments that gets back to me quite often is that people will say, I'm getting far more pictures now of wolves than I am of deer. And I by the time I got my most recent column, or a letter like that, email like that, I just happened to know that within the week, the DNR here in Wisconsin was going to be releasing a report on this thing called Snapshot Wisconsin, where the Wisconsin DNR works with citizens to monitor trail cameras across the state. And they have rules on where you can put the trail cams. They got to basically be approved by the DNR, so it meets some parameters that they set on where they want these cameras placed. And then the people start reporting in on what they're seeing on those cameras and turning in their pictures. And the data showed real clearly that, roughly speaking, for every 400 and some deer pictures we had, you'd get one wolf picture. So that, and it's not uniform across the north like that, but overall, when you break it down in the northern counties that have wolves, like I say, it's for every wolf picture you had over 400 deer pictures. And how that's not a population estimate, but that's just basically what shows up in front of a camera. And I'll always say that I trust the deer biologists and the bear biologists and the wolf biologists to know a lot more about what that means about the population status than I can interpret, because I'm not a scientist, and I'll be the first one to admit that. So I'm kind of rambling there, but that's one of the topics I addressed just recently was, don't write. I basically was saying, don't write to me and say all you're getting is wolf pictures, because maybe that's true for you, but realize this is one person's perspective. And there's many people out there across northern Wisconsin, and many properties and many trail cameras. And obviously, when you pull them all together, that the deer pictures are swamping the wolf pictures. And that was kind of the numbers I sat there with my calculator and added up all these different counties and broke it down and sent the article. After I got the article written, I sent it off to Steve Ranella and his producer, Corinne Schneider, and just said, I thought you guys might find this interesting. And I was really flattered that they spent as much time on that topic as they did on this week's podcast.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Luke.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I find fascinating in the new hot button issue, other than wolves, is actually mountain lions. And you just recently wrote an article about the guy that was in Wisconsin, right?
It's only about 60 miles from me.
Yeah, and I mean, I know personally a lot of people that have had a mountain lion show up on their camera, but you think about it, a lot of those guys live in the same area. The potential is very high for that mountain lion to be the same mountain lion showing up on these different trail cams. But can you kind of talk about that a little bit? And because there was some hate mail for that too, wasn't there?
Yeah, that was really that's a continuing interesting issue. This happened down in Buffalo County, Wisconsin, which you guys probably know. Buffalo County's claim to fame for over 60, 70 years now. It's basically Wisconsin Wisconsin's big buck capital.
Hmm.
Buffalo County is number one in the nation for producing big whitetails. It's just had this real it's called the bluff country right along the Mississippi River, and it's big bluffs, good farm country, but also a lot of territory that's hard to hunt. So over the years, it's always had a good reputation for growing big bucks. But so it didn't really surprise me to hear that there's a cougar roaming that area. We get one of the great things about trail cameras, getting back to trail cameras again, is that they've given us insights into what's roaming the woods like nothing before. Before, to prove you saw a mountain lion before the era of trail cams, basically you had to wait for one to get hit by a car or something. I know the first one that was documented in Wisconsin as an actual cougar, a guy in southern Wisconsin walked into his barn one day and saw his big cat go flying out the back of the barn. And when the DNR came out, they were able to collect enough hair samples, and I think it actually had crapped in a few spots too, so they had some feces to evaluate. And sure enough, they documented that this was a mountain lion. As it turned out, that mountain lion ended up down in a Chicago suburb, and the police ended up shooting it. And when they got the hair samples off that dead cougar, they found it was the same one that had been in this guy's barn in southern Wisconsin. But to get back to the Buffalo County cougar, I think it's back on November 8th or thereabouts. A guy was bow hunting down in Buffalo County, and he had a decoy out at about 40 yards, and he saw something move over in that direction. And he said, next thing you know, he's looking over there and sees this big cat face looking at him. And he realized fairly shortly, this is not your average bobcat or some small cat. This is a cougar, and it has a long tail and everything else. And the thing started stalking him. And it crouched down and would sneak some more, puts its tail, sneaks some more, and kept getting closer and closer. And he was feeling threatened. And he ended up when the cougar got within 13 yards, he figured as fast as they can be, one quick leap and it'd be up the tree after him. And he was really feeling like this thing was after him. And it wasn't looking at his decoy anymore. It basically put the decoy in his rearview mirror, was coming for him. And so he, when it was about 12, 13 yards away, he drew his bow and that took the next step. He shot it. And he after that, he just got out of the woods. It was near dusk. Went back to his car and drove home and notified the DNR. He called the DNR tip line, called it in right away. And next morning, the two wardens showed up, and met him at the property. I think he had his brother along too, the guy. And so it's two wardens and a wildlife manager. And this is where my reporting background, you kind of know how this is going to play out. What law enforcement people do is they question the guy first. Listen to a story, look around, kind of, see if things are lining up with what he's telling them. And then once they've got enough information from the guy, then they take the next step of tracking the cougar. And then they find the cougar and they examine it and see if it all lines up with what he was telling them. And the thing I wrote in my article about was that, these conservation wardens, like most law enforcement people, they've done lots of interrogations, lots of investigations. They tend to know when people are BSing them. Mm-hmm. and they were, when they talked to this guy and looked at the cougar, they were convinced that he's telling the truth, that he feared for his life. He did not want the cougar. He never asked them if he could have it. And they just loaded it up in one of these big ice fishing type sleds, hauled it out of the woods, and talked to the DA and just decide that there's no violation here. One thing in our country that's pretty universal is that if your life is being threatened by an animal, whether it's a pet or a wild animal, you're entitled to defend yourself. And they figured this guy acted responsibly, and they They just didn't have any reason to prosecute him. But what really struck me working on this article was how many people instantly prejudged the guy. They never talked to him. They hadn't read any information about it other than a little basics about what, who, what, where, when, and why. And the why never gets answered in this kind of stories. But so I felt like, here I interviewed the warden supervisor. I interviewed a retired warden who actually interviewed the guy. The guy would not talk to me. He just wrote to me real apologetically and sent me a text message saying that he's basically burned out on the whole thing. He's been not sleeping because he's stressed about the whole situation, and just was shutting down. He said, I gave my one interview. I talked to the law enforcement people, and I just don't want to push any further. I want to just kind of go away now. And I tell you, I kind of respect that. But I talked to the warden then that had interviewed him for the newspaper article that this warden wrote for Wisconsin Outdoor News. And the guy's name is Dave Zeig. And I've known Dave since he was, a warden himself back in, during his working days. I think Dave's only about 7 or 8 years older than me. I'm 60. I'll be 68 here in another month. But Dave, again, is another professional warden who did a lot of investigations during his career, and he found the guy credible too. So I thought, well, who are we to argue with 3 trained investigators who interviewed the guy and took his testimony, saw the physical evidence, and made a conclusion. And their boss questioned them, the DA questioned them, and they all agreed that there's no story here as far as prosecution. But I'm still, this won't surprise you guys, but I still get emails from people who have read my article, listened to read my point of view on the thing, and basically tell me I'm still naive and I don't know what I'm talking about, and they know better, and here's what he really did. And I just, in those cases, I just kind of shrug and go, well, I have nothing more to offer. I put my information out there, and if you don't want to buy it, I can't sell it. I'm not trying to sell it. I just feel confident that I told as much of the story as I can get my hands on, and that it's about as complete as it will ever be. And so I feel good about this, my take on the thing, that this guy was justified. And the thing I'll say is, I wasn't there. I wasn't there when that cougar was coming in. Maybe I would have acted differently for me. Maybe I wouldn't have shot it, but I'll never know because I wasn't there.
Right.
But he made a decision that he has to live with, and I think if the wardens are satisfied, I guess I'm satisfied.
Yeah, I've had encounters with bobcats, and I'm afraid of a 35-pound little cat. You know what I mean? Because I know the amount of damage that a little cat like that could do. I mean, just take, for example, your grandma's cat as a kid, and how much damage that cat could do to you as a little kid. Now add 30 pounds to that cat, and then add another 85 to 100 pounds to that bobcat.
Yeah.
I think I would change my mind too, especially knowing it can bound, 15 feet right up that tree stand at you and pull you down. Absolutely. I've got a friend that was out west elk hunting, and actually he was sitting glassing, decided to kind of lay back. His eyes were strained, and just took a brief moment of rest. He heard something. And so he turns over and looks, doesn't see anything, turns his head back, hears something again, and now the cat's making noise. And it's looking right at him, and it's about 15 feet away from him. And from that 15 feet, he said he put his hand on his pistol, looked at the cat, yelled, and just started making himself big. And as soon as he did that and yelled, the cat actually bounded right at him. And he shot it. He goes, luckily I bought a brand new 10 millimeter and practiced with it a few times. He goes, because I drew it. It was on my chest rig, shot the thing, and it was, dead right in front of me. He goes, but if I wouldn't have put those rounds, he goes, it hit me before it was actually, before it touched the ground, it hit me.
Yeah. Well, I think, I'm sure somebody in law enforcement will correct me, but I think when they teach policemen their self-defense, or when they have to take action to protect themselves, I think it's like at around 20 to 21 feet, someplace in there, where they figure a human who's motivated can close that distance before you can act typically. To actually, draw your gun, get it aimed, and make a shot. And then I've read too that the typical that I think it's only like about 30% of bullets fired by law enforcement people actually hit the target. So it's a high stress situation. It's something moving fast, and I think, well, that's just for humans dealing with maybe somebody jacked up on drugs or something. And you're thinking, well, here's a cat, a mountain lion with 4 legs, 128 pounds. That thing can probably move like lightning. At 13 yards. I have a hard time second guessing the guy that was actually there, and now having to live with the all annoyances of people second guessing him. It's just I'm glad it's not me.
Yeah, for sure. What's weird though is it's such a hot button issue because there is no tags allocated for them. You cannot hunt them in Wisconsin, but you go to a state like Colorado or something like that, or Montana, right, where there are tags, and you call the conservation, they come out, they do an investigation, they fill out the report, and it's just business as usual. Yeah. I mean, granted, there are a lot more attacks and sightings and stuff like that out there, but it's just so weird how people here are so polarized and against it and so quick to judge. And out there, it's almost a common occurrence now.
I should point out too. I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, but like Iowa doesn't protect cougars. They're not a protected species in Iowa. And they've at times talked about making them a protected species like Minnesota does and Wisconsin does. And basically Minnesota and Wisconsin, you're not allowed to shoot them unless they're threatening property or life. And Iowa though has never had a protection on mountain lions. So basically if you see one in Iowa, you can shoot it without you don't have to justify it. They're basically not protected. And from what I understand, it's because when they have tried to bring it up in the legislature to grant them that kind of protection that other states give them, the agricultural community says, we don't want to deal with cougars attacking our livestock. Why should we protect something that could kill our livestock? And so it's never gotten anywhere. And so I think there's different values that we have in different parts of the country, and I think, well, like we were talking about earlier about the whole arguing and debating stuff. Well, in Iowa, you'd probably lose that argument. We don't think they should be protected. Where Wisconsin and Minnesota, they're protected.
Yeah. What I'm always blown away by is you watch these videos online, and everybody's freaking out about the mountain lion encounters. But what I'm freaking out about is who has the wherewithal to bring out their cell phone and turn it on and record this while it's happening. Like that would be the last thing that would cross my mind. Oh, I need to get this on video. There's a mountain lion.
That's what's messed up about the time we're living in and the society and how it's evolved to. They want to document everything, put it on social media. Their phone comes out before they have the wherewithal to dial 911. They record somebody. They stand by and watch somebody get mugged rather than, maybe yell at the person or try and stop them or draw their attention away from the person being attacked. It's just, it's a weird place we're living in, but that's where we're at.
When you say that, I think too, how, personally, I'm always amazed that people can have that awareness to pull out the phone and actually even be thinking about it, recording it. Because I don't know how many times in my recent travels and bumping into people, old friends, or it might be, that you'll sit there and have a conversation with them. You're so happy to see them. Then you split, walk away, and a half hour later you think, we should have gotten a picture of ourselves together because we haven't seen this guy for 20 years, and 30 years, whatever it might be. And yet, some people have the wherewithal. The first thing that comes to mind. Let's do a selfie.
Well,
And
that's
let's record this, and it just hasn't really become part of my my MO or whatever.
I've seen you take some selfies
too,
in the grocery store before.
I do it all the time.
Yeah.
I it's funny. I'm real inconsistent. It's sometimes I think about it, and sometimes it's So I would never be able to predict what I'll do next.
Yeah. I get it. Clay and I like to live in the moment so much. A lot of times we forget. Lately, he documents a lot more than I do, though, I think.
I actually have to purposely remind myself to take pictures of my kids.
Yeah.
because I'm my gal Madeline, her phone is just chock full of pictures of the kids, but then I'll be like looking through my phone and it's like nothing but plants and mushrooms.
Oh, because you're foraging.
Yeah.
And deer. Yeah, that's what I do.
And deer and beavers, because I also like I do trap and hunt and stuff too. But predominantly when I'm taking pictures of things, it's really a lot of plant life and mushrooms.
Yeah.
And then I'll be like, God, not many pictures of my kids in here. I gotta like remind myself, oh yeah, I'm with my kids. Hey, let's take a picture.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to.
No, I was gonna say I did want to ask you one more thing about the wolf thing, and that's historical records, show, like you made some reference to this earlier, but Lewis and Clark expedition, they were going across the country. There's wolves everywhere. There's what some people call the extinct plains grizzly. I don't know if it was actually a separate species, but some people believe it was. And then there's mountain lions everywhere. Well, there's also conversely this giant abundance of elk and deer and all other game animals. So what is the disconnect there with like people in the past? I'm sure they associated wolves with some level of threat to like the amount of game out there, but they also didn't seem to be as worried about it as we do in the modern era, and we have far less of them.
Well, I'm not a wolf historian, but from what I gather is that a lot of the fears and animosity we have against wolves we brought over from Europe. I mean, there are records of wolves apparently killing people in pretty good numbers at times in old time Germany and some of these European countries. And because wolves haven't disappeared from, wolves, you can find wolves in Sweden, Norway, Italy, I think Spain. They've been around. They're down even into some of the Middle Eastern countries, and they have a record of killing people. So it does happen when people act like. I mean, it's not common, at least not in modern times. But there is some decent historical records of wolves killing people, and then people coming to our country and carrying that hatred and fear with them, as they moved across this country. But I don't, I think I can think of about a couple of famous cases in one in Canada not that long ago where wolves killed a guy, and so it does happen. But the thing I'll point out is that for Wisconsin, the typical complaint you hear about wolves is that they're killing all the deer. But the research that's been done so far, we can always do more research. There's always more things to be learned. But the initial reports and research we did in Wisconsin was that black bears account for most of the predation on whitetail fawns. When fawns drop, bears are out in the spring. They're hungry, and they are very good at targeting fawns in that week or two period when the fawns aren't fast enough to get away from them, or they're just hiding. And black bears can be real methodical in hunting them down and finding them after they're born and killing them. But Steve Rinella makes a good point that people in Wisconsin are used to bears. Bears never went away in Wisconsin. And so we kind of accepted the fact that bears kill fawns. We never until recently never documented it very well, but it's just they're part of the landscape. They've always been here for our grandparents' era and our era, and so that we're just kind of familiar with them. But wolves are a more recent thing. Wolves were pretty much gone from this state during the 1970s, and they really just came back real slowly in the 80s. And it wasn't until like the mid 90s where they really started taking off. And now they're at a point where I had a discussion with a guy yesterday. He was making some sarcastic comments about, well, if people in southern Wisconsin love wolves so bad, why don't we send them some? And my point with him was,
great idea.
Now, why should we spend money? Why should Wisconsin spend money shipping wolves down to southern Wisconsin? They walked into Wisconsin from Minnesota on their own. So if they really want to live in southern Wisconsin, they'll figure it out. We don't know yet that they'll stop and not infiltrate our southern counties. Maybe they will, but something tells me though that they seem to have kind of stabilized in their current northern Wisconsin environments, and the central forest Wisconsin. There's some there too, but they really they'll wander into other parts of southern Wisconsin. They don't seem to be hanging around and sticking there. But the thing I'll say is, they've surprised us before. Maybe they'll surprise us again and move into more of those counties, because there's plenty of food down in southern Wisconsin as far as deer goes. There's more deer in southern Wisconsin than there is in the forest. So I never say never. Maybe that wish will come true, and then we can all have more things to argue about. And it's. I'm willing to watch and let it play out. As guess is all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I wish they'd reintroduce bison and everything else as well. But yeah, but
that's really I think an interesting discussion item is that where do we want to draw a line on all these different species to reintroduce? I mean, the wolves basically reintroduce themselves. All we got to do is basically quit killing them on sight, and they restored. And the sandhill crane, we had those things driven down to where back in all the Leopolds there of the 1930s and 40s. He thought we'd never see sandhill cranes in Wisconsin again. That they're driven down to a point where they're bound for extinction here, extirpation. But they've bounced back. They've come back. Canada geese. You guys probably are too young to remember, but I remember back in the 80s, we were allowed one goose a year in Wisconsin. You shot one goose, you were done. You got your tag and you shot it and you went home and you're happy. And
wow.
Now, I haven't hunted geese now for a number of years, but every time I see those big flocks settling on cut cornfields around here, my blood pressure goes up right away. I wish I was out there.
That's awesome.
I am not the biggest fan of the flavor of goose. I usually have to cook it in, barbecue sauce or something. Yeah. So, I actually, it's funny what you just said, because, as somebody who harvests wild rice, and somebody like myself, I'm trying to reestablish wild rice all over around me in Michigan, and one of the biggest predators of the plant is Canada geese. So me wanting to hunt geese is actually not for so much for the meat. Of course, I'll eat the meat, but it is that's a secondary thing. The real reason that I want to kill geese is because there's too dang many of them.
There's a lot of geese.
It's gotten personal, huh?
Yeah. Well, what is it? The statistics that I read before is that like a single family of geese can eat like 3 acres of growing wild rice, like the greens. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's
I wouldn't know.
They're pretty detrimental. There's the Bay Mills Indian Reservation in the UP, and they are actively doing a restoration project for wild rice. And one of the things that they've been encountering is geese have just been messing up their reintroduction. So what they're doing is basically trying to, kill a lot of geese up there.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
So one of the articles that you wrote, and I know this, I've heard this lure or legend and story before, but now it's actually been kind of the one with the the two hunters, out-of-state hunters that go into the Michigan bar and start talking.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of an interesting story. Can you kind of talk about that? And like how much research? I mean, there had to have been some digging, pretty deep digging to find all the old articles and things on that to compound upon it.
Yeah, this is one of the, I think, fun things about what I do for a living. I had written a couple of articles probably 2 or 3 years ago now about a Wisconsin warden who was murdered in the Green Bay area by a kind of this recluse type guy. He hunted and trapped. I think he was a trapper too, but he was just kind of a recluse. But he killed this warden and buried him, and he decapitated him and then buried him. It was just a gruesome story. And after I wrote that story and Meat Eater ran it, I got an email from a guy, or some guy contacted me from Michigan. And he said, you should look into this story about him. He mentioned this story of the two. Well, they were kind of half-assed deer hunters. They really weren't serious deer hunters. And he talked about how they lived in the Detroit area, and he kind of gave me some background on it. And I looked up this book he recommended. It was a book called A Dark Night or something, or I forget all the details already. I sound like an old man, but I write so much, and then I move on to the next topic so fast that I start forgetting the details real quickly. But there was a good book written about it. But also I went on newspapers.com. It's this great website where you can buy short time subscriptions to it. Then just start typing into the search engine what you're looking for, and you start getting all these articles from the Detroit Free Press that covered the case and the trial and everything else. And they eventually caught these two brothers and prosecuted them for these guys' murders. But to kind of, for the people who aren't aware of the story, there's these two guys, lifelong friends. They're like in their I think they're like 27, 28 years old in that age group. And they had told, one guy was married, one guy had a girlfriend, and they had told their wife and girlfriend that then they go up to the family cabin up in northwestern Michigan for the second week of deer season. Well, then they never arrived. And instead they'd gone, it took a long time for this all to kind of be investigated and verified. But apparently instead of going up to the family cabin, they went up north to the northeast part of Michigan and spent the weekend basically carousing and pissing off the locals. And the one thing that just struck me, I think all people who ever go visit rural bars know that if you're an outsider in a local bar up north or out in a rural area of anywhere in the world, probably you keep a low profile. You don't irritate the locals. But apparently these guys both were making really ugly type of advances toward women, grabbing their butts. They're just humping, all sorts of weird shit where they just shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff in a bar. And eventually they basically irritated a couple of guys who were known locally as being hardened criminals that people were really afraid of. And one thing that was interesting was that no one really knows how they got out of this bar. If they were basically arms behind their back and shoved out and then beaten up, taken away and beaten up and killed, or if they just lured them out of the bar with promises of drugs or something else. No one really knows how they got out of the bar, but they created a scene in the bar, basically triggered a near fight a couple times. The police were called. The police didn't show up though. Eventually, they ended up in a field about a mile away, and they were both beaten to death with a baseball bat. And it was just a gruesome murder. And it took a long time. They basically clubbed them to death. Wow. And a woman that happened to a woman who had been in the bar lived in a trailer not too far away from the bar, maybe a mile away, and she had seen these vehicles go flying past her trailer out in this field nearby, and then she sneaked out with her boyfriend to see what was going on because she could hear screaming and hollering, and she described it as a metal ping. It was basically the aluminum bat hitting these guys in the head, and she sneaked out and witnessed the murders, and then lived in fear for 18 years.
Oh.
And eventually, an investigator tracked her down after about 16 years. Because she had confided to a couple of friends at different times what she'd seen, and then these friends notified the police that they need to talk to her, but she was deathly afraid of talking to anyone from the police because she knew these guys that had done the killings were very capable of killing her. I mean, she was really in fear of her own life. So anyway, she eventually, after about 2 years of this detective befriending her and gaining her trust, she finally told them in a deposition what she'd seen, and then that finally gave them enough proof to bring these guys, arrest these guys, bring them in, and go into court and prosecute them. And now they're still alive. They're serving their life in prison. There's no chance of her ever being paroled. She died about, I think, the woman that testified against them, I think she died like in her early 60s, late 50s maybe. Not too long, like maybe 5, 6 years, 7 years after the trial. She didn't live her whole long after that. But she I always think how it must have been to live for 18 years, that kind of fear, worrying about these guys showing up on her doorstep and doing the same to her. But she eventually came around and gave the information, and that's how they finally got those guys. But these guys were really the story. I tracked down Tom Henderson, the author of this book I was telling you about. That Tom wrote this definitive book on the murders, and the story he tells to kind of give you an idea of what these guys were like to be around. They were having a barbecue one summer, and they thought they're running low on meat. They're barbecuing a pig or something. And when they realized they didn't have enough meat to serve all their friends that come over, they actually went down. They knew a neighbor had some cattle out in this field. And they drove over to the guy's field. One of them shot a cow. They got their chainsaws out, butchered this thing with chainsaws in the field, and hauled the slabs out in their truck, and just went back and continued their barbecue as if this is what you do. You just take the neighbor's cow and slaughter it like that. And you think, like Miss Henderson said, what kind of people are capable of that? It's acting like the neighbor's cow is that they're entitled to that cow, and then they cut it up with chainsaws. Just brutal stuff. And then
Wow.
the part of the story too that I talked about in my article was that it's very possible the thing is the police never found these victims. They drove like a Ford Bronco. They never found the Bronco. They never found their 3 or 4 guns they had with them for hunting, and they had handguns too. They never found the bodies. Never found any physical evidence to tie these guys to a murder. It was all basically circumstantial evidence and eyewitness accounts. But it was just one of the stories in there that I remember too is that they had these they'd threaten people all the time, including her, that they'd say pigs got to eat too. Well, one of their acquaintances apparently was a pig farmer, and these guys raised pigs, had pigs, and they think what happened is these guys ran those bodies through a chipper, and they just fed the meat and bones to their pigs. That's
some Fargo stuff there.
Just awful stuff that you can't make it up.
Wow.
And so that was my more recent meat eater piece. That was this brutal murder of these Michigan guys, and it makes your skin crawl when you're reading the details. And that the Detroit Free Press had a lot of really interesting articles about it too, where they they had big stories about all these different characters involved in the story, because there's multiple people that disappeared over the years. That there were people who were there at the time, and then all of a sudden they just disappeared. And I started, when I was interviewing this Tom Henderson about it, I said, well, what about this person? What about that person? What happened to them? And he said, when you're running that crowd and you disappear, these are the kind of people they ran with. And they could have, they're into drugs, they're into alcohol, they're just really leading hard scrabble lives. And so it wasn't unusual for people like that to just disappear. They'd take off, not show up ever again. And either they died, they were murdered, or else they just moved away. That no one really knows this. They really weren't your normal people like you and me. So it's a real I wrote that article, and I just kept, while I'm working on it, just thinking, man, this is a different world. Most of us don't come across people like that who are just so callous that they can kill people and not have apparently any conscience about it, and do things as basic as stealing your neighbor's cow and chopping it up in his field and then dragging it out and not having any remorse. Just really hard people.
Well, you probably do come across them. You just don't realize it. You do.
Oh, yeah. And you hope you hope it stays that way,
Yeah. So, Pat, you've been involved in the deer and deer hunting industry for a really, really long time, and I see behind you got a lot of camo. You're really into deer hunting. Do you do any other kind of hunting?
People have actually teased me about that over the years, about when I go goose hunting, I'm thinking about deer hunting. When I go fishing, I'm thinking about deer hunting, and so forth. I really love deer hunting, but in recent years, starting around 2005, I started hunting out west for elk. And I'll never claim to be a great elk hunter, but I'm a persistent elk hunter. So I've gotten at least 3 or 4 bulls and about 3 or 4 cows. I think I have a total of 6 elk now over the years, and I think I got 5 of them bow hunting now. And I really enjoy it, because I like the thing I like about it is it's a real physical challenge. It's not only a hunting challenge, but it's to hunt the mountains. You realize it's not like your typical Wisconsin whitetail hunt where you park and walk maybe a quarter of a mile at the most usually and sit in a stand. Elk hunting it's pretty high intensity stuff, just getting yourself up the mountain each morning and getting back in there, and then if you get one, hauling it back out. I really like that. I wish I could say I was more into I haven't done much bird hunting in recent years, but I used to goose hunt a lot. I like that. And I hang around buddies who are good grouse hunters, but I'm a miserable grouse hunter. I go and I'm always one of these people who I'm still more inclined to go to point at the bird and go, oh, there goes one, instead of realizing I should be pointing at it with a shotgun. It's just I'm just not very good at it. But I find it. I still like to, my big love when it comes to the outdoors is I love bluegill fishing and perch fishing. I do a little muskie fishing, but not much, because I'm more into the catch and eat. I like to eat fish, so I like to eat perch and bluegills above all else.
Okay.
But I like walleyes, and I like northern pike. I troll a couple times with my roll. I have a cedar boat, roll trolling boat I built, and I enjoy muskie road trolling a couple times this summer, but I never get real serious about muskies. So I always figure that's I like eating fish too much to get full time into muskies.
Me too. That's one of the things I was going to ask you, and you covered it, because I myself, I think the same way. You could bass fish all you want, and I do enjoy it. And sometimes I fish tournament stuff, but at the end of the day, I want to eat the fish. I'm more of a panfish guy. If I got the choice between a walleye, I'm going to choose a perch. I'm going to choose a perch. So
yeah. Well, the other thing I really enjoy just haven't done it much in recent years. But when my oldest daughter was still around, before she went off to the Navy and college and whatever, I really loved trolling for salmon on Lake Michigan. We used to live on the other side of the state, so I can get over to Lake Michigan and fish for half a day with only an hour and a half drive over. I think we lived in Waupaca, Wisconsin, which is an hour and a half from the Lake Michigan shoreline. And I got pretty good at that. It's like everything else with hunting and fishing. When you get into something, next thing you know, you spend $1,000 on new junk, but then you get into it, you learn how to do stuff, and you pay attention to what other people are doing. And it's fun to fight those big fish.
Yeah.
So I get a kick out of it. Plus I like eating them. I like eating salmon.
Yeah. I got a ton of friends around here that go out, because I live in Traverse City. So we get a lot of free salmon, on occasion, we'll get people like my old neighbor just gave us like so many fillets. It was unbelievable.
That's awesome.
Like, why are you fishing? He's like, I don't know, I just really like it.
Well, when you mentioned Traverse City, that's one of my memories of the Lakefront Marathon. I think they call it the Lakefront or
the Bayshore Marathon.
Bayshore Marathon, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Lakefront's over in Milwaukee. But the Bayshore Marathon, it goes up that, I think it's like a peninsula, isn't it? That runs up, then you turn around and come back. And so you're looking at that big, I think it's Grand Traverse Bay, isn't it, that runs along? And that's like, I kept doing that when I'm out there running along, in my case, kind of suffering along. And I would look out in that bay and watch those boats and thinking, when are they catching it? When are they getting these salmon this time of year? And I just always, it was one of those beautiful days, and that's a beautiful region that you live in. But that's all I could think about was what I would be doing if that was me out in that boat. And it's something about big water that really I find real fascinating. Because when you have you're fishing in those kind of waters, you don't know what you'll get next. So you probably usually salmon, but once in a while you get a lake trout, and once in a while you get a big brown trout or something. At least in Wisconsin.
Oh, it's Grand Traverse Bay.
It's fun.
Grand Traverse Bay is mostly lake trout and whitefish, and then the bay won't be inundated with salmon until like basically the fall. Like
was that right?
Summer.
Okay,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, because they kind of stay out in the real big water. The bay is kind of like closed off.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm lost when it comes to open water, like big water fishing.
Yeah.
I'm used to small lakes.
Yeah, I'm friends with my friend, the tribal fisherman here for the Pishabastan tribe. And Ed is an amazing guy, and he catches a lot of lake trout and whitefish, and occasionally he'll catch burbot. And and then I'll ask him, please, if you catch one, keep it for me.
Do you really want to eat the burbot though? Why?
Oh my God, they're amazing. They taste so good.
Yeah, that's one thing that I when I was first out of the Navy back in the early 80s, I remember catching a couple of burbot on a lake called Lake Poygan. It's in east central Wisconsin. It's part of the Winnebago system. And I didn't know what they were. I just knew they were just ugly as sin, and they wrap around your arm when you pull them out of the water. And they almost look like a snake, their head. And so I remember unhooking them and just putting them back down the hole. and then I learned that they're freshwater cod. And then I felt like an idiot because I thought, God, cod's some of the best eating fish there are, But I still have not had once I learned what they really were and how good they were supposed to be. I haven't caught one since, of course. It's the way it goes.
Oh man. Well, you will.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
So Pat, we're kind of rolling on the time here, but
okay.
So just before we go, I just kind of want you to tell everybody, where they can find your articles if they want to, reach out to you to maybe give you a lead on a really awesome story or anything like that. How do they go about that?
Well, that's one thing I was going to say. I appreciate that your offer there, because I do get a lot of my good stories ideas come from people, come from my readers. And it's I always tell people too, they'll say, can I send you an idea? Can I write to you this? And I always tell them, everyone else does, you might as well too, because you're the friendly ones, because the people who don't like me or mad at me they don't have any problem contacting me. So, but yeah, my website is patrickdurkinoutdoors.com. It's just all one word, Patrick Durkin, and Durkin is spelled Durkin. But patrickdurkinoutdoors.com. You can find me at Patrick Durkin Outdoors at Instagram and on Facebook too. So, but yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. And if you ever want to read, I have my website has all my I carry all my weekly newspaper columns on my website, and also it's not very hard just to type in my name and Meat Eater, and you'll get I think I've written over 100 articles over the last 5 years for Meat Eater too. So there's lots of stuff there, and they actually have a queue set up with all my little picture and then all my articles underneath it. So I'm pretty easy to find. And I also I've written a lot over the years for American Hunter magazine, and so if you Google my name in American Hunter, you'll find quite a few articles there too. So it's I always feel real fortunate to have done been in the career I'm in, because it's I'm still working now. I'm not working when I was freelancing full time. I was pretty much regularly working 60, 70 hours a week. And now I'm cut back to a normal 40-hour work week and trying to find a little time for fishing. But I encourage people to get in touch with me. I can't, one of my favorite things I kind of chuckle about, a little aside here, is that I'll write a column, and my columns typically run 1,000 words. And quite often I'll get emails from guys, and they'll write me an email with about 1,000-word questions, and then want me to answer all their questions. And I have to politely explain that, the only thing I can sell basically is my time. And so I have to sell it to people who are actually paying me to write. So I can't answer these real long emails that have a ton of questions. I can answer a question here and there, but I can't spend all day writing on something for free, because I have a thing written on my desk here. It's a guy named Samuel Johnson. He was a great writer, philosopher in England back in the 1700s. So this is like 300 years ago. He had a great line where he says, "No man but a blockhead ever wrote except for money." And that reminds me, if you write for a living, you better get paid for it.
Right.
So some of your ideas, but don't expect me to write you a book in response, so.
Yeah. It's a good idea. Well, hey, I really appreciated talking to you and hearing all your stories. You're a really awesome writer, and
well, thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
Yep. Keep doing what you're doing, Pat.
Thank you, guys.
I do enjoy reading them. It's kind of why I reached out to you. So,
well, I appreciate you. I'm always flattered. Honestly, I still think it's fun to get these kind of offers and opportunities to talk to folks, because writing is not something that you always there's a lot of time sitting at a computer screen. And my youngest daughter, one time when she was in high school, this is like half a lifetime ago for her now, I remember her coming home from high school one day and saying, so and so wants to know if he can job shadow you, some guy in her class. She's like in 10th grade, and she told him, he asked my daughter, "Could you ask your dad if I could job shadow him for a day?" And Carson looked at him and says, "Why would you want to job shadow my dad? He sits in his office and stares at his computer all day." And I always thought, that's what my daughters think of me. This is what I do for a living. I stare at my computer all day. So,
wow.
But actually, the reality is that that's not that far from the truth. It's kind of like outdoor writing is kind of like I think it's kind of like selling bait. You get to hear you get to hear who's catching fish and where they're catching them, but you don't get to catch them yourself.
Right.
You're too busy, selling bait. So as an outdoor writer, it's kind of the same thing.
You're too busy staring at the inner workings of your own mind on the screen.
Yeah. You're too busy, talking on the phone and taking notes and reading and staring, like she says, staring at the computer. Well, I said, I'm not staring at the computer. I'm reading. I'm highlighting stuff to remember for my next article.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Pat,
thank you.
I, for one, am going to look forward to re-listening to this again in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on.
You bet.
Yeah.
And once again, thank you so much for listening to the Publicly Challenged podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please subscribe on whatever platform it is you're listening to. Also, if you could leave a review, that would help us out. And you can check us out on Instagram or at publiclychallenged.com. And once again, thank you so much for listening to the show.